Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we prepare for next year's centennial anniversary of the National Park Service, I'm reminded of something Stephen Mather, that agency's very first director, once said. Reflecting on the new agency, he remarked that, quote, "The parks do not belong to one state or to one section. The Yosemite, the Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon are national properties in which every citizen has a vested interest. They belong as such to the man, and I would add woman, of Massachusetts, of Michigan, of Florida, as they do to the people of California, of Wyoming, and of Arizona." These words are a powerful reminder in this era of political division and disagreement. National parks cut across party lines and geographic boundaries. They enjoy bipartisan support, and they bring people together, something we seem to need now more than ever to celebrate in our nation's great traditions and history and natural legacy. For almost 100 years, generation after generation of Americans have made the commitment that our most significant historical, cultural, and natural sites should be preserved in perpetuity for future generations. Our national parks have been famously called America's best idea and have become ingrained in our national identity. Places like the Grand Canyon, the Yellowstone, Ellis Island, and in my own district, Minuteman National Historical Park, which commemorates the shot heard round the world and the very beginnings of our country. These parks protect, celebrate, and give access to the many places that have shaped and defined who we are as a people and a country. And it is important to remember that these places would not have been protected absent support from the federal government. And investments in our parks make economic sense. Nationally, the parks generate nearly $30 billion in economic activity and support 250,000 private sector jobs. When people visit our national parks, they also support nearby restaurants, hotels, and local outfitters and guides, and bring attention to the unique attributes of a hosting community. According to a recent economic study conducted by the National Park Service, every federal dollar invested in our parks contributes $10 in economic activity. Despite its significant and multifaceted contributions, however, the Park Service budget has been shrinking. In just the past 10 years, the Park Service has had its budget decreased by 22%. Compromising its ability to ensure the long-term protection of our treasured national heritage. This dramatic reduction in funding has occurred despite widespread support for federal investment in the National Park Service. In fact, a recent poll commissioned by the National Parks Conservation Association found that 9 in 10 Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, support sustained funding for national parks. The discussion draft we are considering today could be an important first step to commemorate the 2016 Centennial. Many of the provisions in the bill before us today have bipartisan support and were also included in H.R. 3556, also called the National Park Service Centennial Act, which was introduced by Ranking Member Grijalva. For example, the draft legislation makes a commitment to the Centennial Challenge, a matching grant program that leverages federal dollars to encourage private investments to support signature centennial projects identified by the National Park Service. The draft legislation also establishes an endowment at the National Park Foundation to support the missions and goals of the Park Service and makes improvements to the Volunteers in Parks program. While I am thankful to be discussing this draft legislation, I fear that it is an exercise in wishful thinking. I agree with the majority that we must address the maintenance backlog in order to enhance visitor experiences and preserve our parks for the next generation. But making a dent in the maintenance backlog is going to require significant investment, and this legislation doesn't authorize any new federal dollars for our national parks in their centennial year. New revenue generated by fees will not solve this problem. H.R. 3556, introduced by Ranking Member Grijalva, provides $300 million for a new second-century infrastructure investment fund to address critical maintenance backlog needs. It also provides $100 million to establish the Public Land Centennial Investment Program, a competitive fund open to our 4 land management agencies for top priority visitor services, outdoor recreation, land and water restoration, and energy efficiency projects. Mr. Grijalva's legislation also fully funds the Centennial Challenge at $100 million, maximizing our opportunity to generate private matching funds. And it authorizes these new programs only through 2018, demonstrating a clear commitment to projects that can have an immediate impact on our parks and quickly address some of the deferred maintenance backlog. Next year, all eyes will be on our national parks and the expected influx of visitors. I look forward to working with my colleagues to reach a bipartisan compromise on the two proposals for the National Park Service Centennial Act. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I think from all your testimonies, especially Mr. McDonald and Mr. Now, and I think Director Jarvis knows it well, that the impact of our national parks is really clear. And this was really perhaps never more clear than when the government shutdown occurred, and I think, Mr. McDonald, you referenced the cost to the gateway communities as a result of it in your written testimony. So our national parks are a great investment. Each federal dollar invested in these parks generates $10 in economic activity, so it's a tremendous return on investment to our local economies. But despite this economic impact, we've been chronically underfunding our parks, leading to a growing backlog of maintenance and infrastructure needs, as we all know. And I know all the members of the committee are very concerned about this. It amounts to $11.5 billion in deferred maintenance costs. And so today, as we consider the Centennial, I think we have to take into account the impact of that billions of dollars in deferred maintenance and how best to address it. But I'd like to share a slide that demonstrates the serious decline in funding for the National Park Service construction account. As the slide demonstrates, the construction account, which is the primary account to address the non-roads half of the maintenance backlog, has gone from over $350 million in fiscal year 2005 to less than $150 million in fiscal year 15. So this is roughly a 62% decrease over the last 10 years, fairly dramatic, I would say. And I think it shows us what the smoking gun is, what the real impact has been on our national parks as they struggle to deal with this maintenance backlog. So, Director Jarvis, can you talk about why the backlog has grown so large, and do you feel that the discussion draft before us today can provide enough funding to make a significant dent in the backlog?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So the maintenance backlog has grown because the National Park Service, in terms of assets, and we have road assets and non-road assets. In terms of physical facilities that we manage and maintain, we're second only to the Department of Defense in terms of total facilities. And those facilities provide access and public enjoyment across the 409 national park units. And the infrastructure is quite old. Most of it was built turn of the century, particularly in the 60s, when there was a major investment in the national park system called Mission 66. Those systems, wastewater, water treatment, sewer systems, buildings, infrastructure, are all now pushing 50, 60 years old. We have a very good inventory of our system. We know every asset, its current condition, and what it's going to take. We need basically twice as much money as we currently have in our construction program to even keep even with the current backlog. The construction budget, you're spot on there. We have several other sources. Our recreation fee program, our what we call repair rehab program, all go into the non-road assets. And then, of course, Congress is working on a transportation bill that has some road money for us as well. But the administration's bill, which requests $300 million in Title III for 3 years in a row, if we were to receive that funding for 10 years in a row, we could bring the non-road high-priority assets across the entire system, we're talking about 6,000 assets, to good condition.
I actually have a follow-on graph that I wanted to show. So the top piece of it shows a discussion draft that we're talking before us, and thankfully it's important that we begin this discussion and the kind of investment that would be made in the maintenance backlog. Then the second piece of it shows what would be the investment that would be made under H.R. 3556, Mr. Grijalva's bill. The next piece shows the annual minimum required to maintain the current levels. And then the bottom piece just shows the total maintenance backlog that has accumulated in over time. So Director Jarvis, again, how better could we help you address this?
Well, I
A
think
leading question, I know.
that's okay. I think the maintenance backlog has to be addressed in a number of ways. One is there are projects that you can raise private dollars to support. And we have a subset of those, and we work with our friends organizations in the National Park Foundation to leverage some federal skin in the game against philanthropy. Then there are projects that are purely a federal responsibility. No one's going to give me philanthropy to fix a wastewater treatment plant. That is a federal responsibility. And so these cycle through and need an investment. And unless we put up the money now, it's pay me later as well. This backlog will grow faster than we are investing in it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Levis.
Director Jarvis.